Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Human Influences. Today, we get to talk about yet another bloodthirsty dictator, one who knew little of the Western world that he goaded into war, but whose deep understanding of pain made him one of the most feared rulers of recent times, a man whose actions helped to launch a multi-generational war, Saddam Hussein. But how did this man go from the top of Iraq's political ladder to the end of a rope? Let's unpack this fascinating story. Born in 1937 to a peasant family in a village on the banks of the Tigris River, Saddam Hussein was brought into the world with the holy trinity of dictator makers. He was mistreated, he was unwanted, and as his country of Iraq was about to find out, he was brilliant in his own evil way. His father had gone missing along with his flock of sheep before Saddam's birth, and his mother, with no means of caring for the unborn child, attempted to terminate her pregnancy and take her own life. She succeeded in neither, and out of this failure, the child was born. Saddam, she named him, the stubborn one. The young Saddam was spared a few months of abuse when he was sent to live with his uncle in Tikrit, where he was exposed to his extremist political views. His uncle was an army officer, but eventually his politics caught up with him, and he was arrested for his part in planning a coup against the pro-British Iraqi regime. Saddam was sent back to live with his mother and her new husband, who subjected him to near constant torment. They stopped him from attending school and instead forced him to steal animals from their fellow villagers. The young Saddam preferred to poison the animals rather than returning them if he was ever caught. And that, ladies, is what I call a massive red flag. After serving his time behind bars, his uncle was eventually freed, and Saddam took the opportunity to run away from home and back to Tikrit. At only 10 years old, Saddam was taken in by his uncle and given a very special gift, a handgun. With aspirations of greatness for him and his nephew, his uncle told him that one day they would rule Iraq and unite the Arab nations. Now armed, the young Saddam joined the Arab Ba'ath Party, which is nowhere near as exciting as it sounds, and worked for them as a hired gun. Now a radical revolutionary, Saddam was embroiled in a plot to assassinate the Iraqi Prime Minister Abd al-Karim Qasim. The plot failed along with the coup, and many of the conspirators were executed for their part. Not Saddam, although he caught a bullet in the leg for his troubles. He fled to Egypt for a time, before returning to stick his nose into yet another coup. This time, he was a wanted man. He was captured and locked up, where he spent his time planning his next move, studying his inspirations. Not Abraham Lincoln, as you can imagine. Saddam preferred to learn from the likes of Hitler and the recent subject of another Human Influences video, Stalin. He was eventually freed by his Ba'athist pals, and in 1968 they finally managed to pull off a successful coup. Saddam was made the deputy head of the secret police force, where his ruthlessness was put to good use. He spied and tortured his way up the political ladder, and soon was made the vice president of the Revolutionary Command Council. You know you're in a very dangerous place if the core of your government refer to themselves as revolutionary. Saddam Hussein didn't become the leader of Iraq until 1979. But he was by all accounts running the country behind the scenes for the whole of the 1970s. Upon taking control, Saddam called a televised meeting where he announced that a plot on his life had been discovered and that the conspirators were in that very room. He then revealed a list of 68 names that were read in front of the whole assembly. These people were quickly arrested and marched out of the meeting to face questioning. 22 of them were executed. This purge didn't stop there. Saddam's list of enemies was long and in many places fictional, but that didn't stop him from murdering and torturing his way through the perceived competition. Once he targeted a group of these enemies, they'd be hunted down, rounded up, and summarily executed on live TV, in a twisted public demonstration of power that only Netflix would buy. This purge left Saddam surrounded by a close-knit circle of family and clan members that filled positions of power throughout the government and military. To say he was paranoid was putting it lightly. He used body doubles. He made visitors strip down before meetings to protect him from would-be assassins, or worse, their germs. Saddam was always on the move. Not even his domestic staff knew where he would be next, and spent their time cleaning and preparing meals at his empty mansions. So where was this coup that Saddam was waiting for? Had he really killed all the competition? Well, some people had legitimate reasons to support Saddam other than fear. His stroke of genius was that he nationalized the country's vast oil supply. He did it just in time for the global energy crisis. This gave Iraq an economic boom on a scale that they had never seen before. Their new leader was winning the people over with wealth. He provided free healthcare and education for Iraqi citizens. This must have cost a bomb, and Saddam was spending 40% of the country's wealth on just that. Missiles, guns, and vehicles, stockpiling arms that he'd bought from foreign powers, including the Soviets and the West. In a few decades, the latter would be seeing this equipment in action firsthand. This stockpiling came to good use after Iran's Islamic Revolution, afraid that the same might happen in Iraq, and knowing that fighting against the spread of Islamic theocracy would do little to anger the West, Saddam invaded Iran. Although outnumbered and outgunned by his new foe, the war quickly turned into a bloody stalemate. This meant one thing for a man like Saddam: he had to develop nuclear weapons. This, as you can probably imagine, provoked serious concern from the rest of the world, and Israel put a stop to this nuclear project by bombing the base into tiny pieces. This was a humiliation for Saddam and a taste of what was to come. With the war going poorly and Saddam's ego well and truly triggered, he took desperate measures and launched a gas attack using a cocktail of mustard gas and nerve agents like sarin on a Kurdish town in the final days of the war. This attack killed up to 5,000 people and injured 10,000 more. The event is known as the Halabja massacre, with victims still suffering from the effects to this day. This was a bad look for the Americans that had backed Saddam against Iran. In 1988, a ceasefire was called, but the fighting was far from over for the Iraqi forces. With thousands of soldiers now unemployed and the country suffering from a crippling war debt, Saddam needed cash and an easy victory to win back support. He targeted the small nation of Kuwait, invading in 1990. Within 6 hours, Kuwait was under Saddam's control. That was it. The United States were officially sick of this guy. They dusted off their hat and sheriff's badge, loaded their six-shooters, and saddled up with their posse of 1.5 million servicemen and women. What they had once giveth, they would now taketh away. The US force showed up in Kuwait, and within 6 weeks, Iraqi forces were completely expelled from the region. Economic sanctions were now in place, and Saddam had to bring his leadership A-game to play off the manhandling he'd just received from the Western powers.
Yeah, well, if you're the sheriff, you better get these men on the ground.
His solution? He lied through his teeth, told his people that he'd beaten the Americans in what he called the mother of all battles, and switched to selling oil and medicines on the black market for cash. But it was too late for Saddam. The wanted poster was already drawn up and hanging on the wall of the global saloon. After 9/11, some tenuous links to Al-Qaeda, accusations of covert weapons programs, and a very lucrative oil pipeline caused the US and her allies to invade in 2003. Within 2 days, Iraq went from having the 4th largest army in the world to the 2nd largest army in Iraq. The Iraqi forces were no match for the might of the coalition army, and within a month Baghdad had fallen and Iraq's proud leader was hiding in a hole somewhere, a similar fate to those who had once tried to evade his capture. In December of 2003, he was hauled out of his hidey hole, part surprised gopher, part war criminal, and in 2004 he was tried for crimes against humanity.
We're under arrest. Look, I'm under what? Gentlemen, this is Democracy Manifest. What is the charge? Eating a meal? A succulent Chinese meal?
Ever the stubborn one, Saddam showed no remorse. In 2006, he was sentenced to death, and in an act of cosmic justice, it was Saddam's time to star in his own public execution. So there we have it, the rise and fall of another evil dictator. Let me know your thoughts on Saddam's story in the comments below. I think it's hard to argue that Saddam didn't deserve what he got. He was a murderer that would stop at nothing to maintain control. The screams from his torture chambers became a sadistic opera that performed nightly in almost every Iraqi city. However, despite intervention from world superpowers, the region is still deadly and disputed to this day. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Human Influencers. Remember to like and subscribe if you did, and leave a comment on which influencer you'd like to see next.